For Krima Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Political analyst Aubrey Majiqi joins me to discuss the outcomes of the ANC policy conference. Aubrey, do you believe that the ANC emerged stronger after the policy conference as it was declared by President Jacob Zuma?
I think it is too early to tell. It will depend more on what the ANC does or not on what it says, because organizational unity and cohesion are not things that come into existence by declaration. So I think it was premature for the president to declare that the ANC was more united after the policy conference than it was before, because the intractable problem of factionalism the ANC has will take quite a long time to deal with. And solutions are way ahead of the ANC, way into the future. It will take many years before the ANC can be restored to its former glory, if that ever happens.
Why do you think his proposal for the loser in the race to be automatically elected as a deputy didn't go well, even for some of his factions?
Well, I spoke to some of the delegates the day before, actually, who were of the view that such a position is undemocratic. The view they took was that the loser in the presidential race should contest, like other candidates, the position of a deputy president. But I think what President Zuma did was to open himself to the perception that he had a preferred candidate in mind and was making this proposal to advantage this preferred candidate if such candidate were to lose in December.
Aubrey, why do you say President Zuma didn't have a good conference?
Well, look at the key debates leading up to the policy conference and look at the key debates at the conference itself. And remember the fact that many of these debates were proxy debates for political and leadership preferences. If you take the question of radical economic transformation, what does the ANC do at the policy conference? It decides to align itself with the National Development Plan. Now, in the first place, the National Development Plan is not a plan. It's a broadly stated vision, and the technocratic work that must be done to turn it into a plan has not been done yet, at least not sufficiently. Secondly, there's nothing radical about the National Development Plan. So the fact that the conference could not come out with a radical vision for the future of this economy can be interpreted in two ways. First of all, that those who went in support of Jacob Zuma to argue the case for radical economic transformation could not win that battle simply because their own argument was inchoate and incoherent. Or alternatively, that the other side had a more coherent argument, or alternatively, that there was a stalemate. But one thing is clear, the side which went there to argue the case for radical economic transformation did not win that day. Look at the non-debate on white monopoly capital. Maybe after this conference, we should call it the not white monopoly capital. You have this policy conference spending an inordinate amount of time debating whether a spade should be a spade. Now, of course, for those who support President Jacob Zuma and those who act and argue in defense of the Gupta family, it was critical for them, for the ANC to be unambiguous in its condemnation of white monopoly capital. They did not win that battle either. Look at the debate over the independence and mandate of the Reserve Bank. The conference comes out affirming both. And therefore, I do not think President Jacob Zuma had a good policy conference, but people have misinterpreted the outcome of these policy debates to mean that President Jacob Zuma did not have the numbers, or the dominant faction in the ANC did not have the numbers. That's a misreading of what a policy conference is compared to a national conference. At a national conference, because it is an elective conference, numbers will matter. At a policy conference, it is the weight of the argument that matters. So the fact that those whose weight of the argument is weak lose the battle does not mean they do not have the numbers. So I think what happened here is that the dominant faction had the numbers but did not have the argument. So the other side won the argument. But in December, it is not the argument that will matter. It will be what happens at the ballot box that will matter.
On the issue of white monopoly capital, what do you think of Joel Netidende's explanation that it was not appropriate to refer to it as white?
To be frank, I just think that whole discussion was bizarre. I can use a much stronger word, but my mother would frown upon that. As I say in the column, this was just a case of sophistry on steroids. And as I say again in the column, this is why steroids are illegal in sport. But more importantly, this is appeasement, parading as something revolutionary. But as they say, when money talks, people mumble. So that was just a lot of mumbling in my view.
Aubrey, since the ANC proposed a research study on land audit and land expropriation without compensation, do you think that by December they will have a clear directive given the divisions on the matter?
You see, this is what happens when you make empty rhetorical commitments. Because at some point you have to match your rhetorical commitments with programs and action. Now, the promise of land reform has been with us since 1994. Yes, we may argue that because of inefficiencies in the state, even what has been promised, the little that has been promised, has not happened. But I think the problem is much deeper. There has been a courage deficit on the part of the leadership of the ANC, if you ask me, since 1994, to posit a radical vision for our future and act on that vision by implementing radical programs. And now the ANC is making these radical commitments to things such as radical economic transformation, expropriation of land without compensation, because it is facing the threat of losing power. At one point, the ANC, that is in 2004, garnered 69.69% of the vote, almost 70%. And what did it do after that election? It kept on assuring, particularly those who benefited from apartheid, that it will not amend the constitution, thus losing the opportunity to use its political power to give effect to the rhetorical commitments it has been making. So I think the policy conference, again, exposed the gap between the words and what the words describe.
Aubrey, can you also clarify what you mean when you say whatever the ruling party will say about economic policy will depend on the constituency?
Well, it's very simple. One of the things the ANC has done very well since 1994 is to talk left and do right. And therefore, what I mean by that is that when it comes to radical economic transformation, or at least the rhetorical commitment to that effect, when the ANC goes to meet big business, ratings agencies, investors, and so on, what it will do is to talk like the Democratic Alliance. But when it talks to the poor, the working class, and so on, it will talk like the economic freedom fighters.
Since you said President Zuma lost key policy battles at the policy conference, does this mean that Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa's supporters should start celebrating?
No. I must remind you that in 2012, the president lost the policy conference. But at the end of that year, in December, in Mangaung, won the national conference. So in the same way here, I think it is premature for anyone to think that the Cyril Ramaphosa camp has won the battle. the next 5 months are going to give us many twists and turns in the battle for the presidency, complicated by the fact that we are going to have many candidates. You have Lindiwe Sisulu, you have Jeff Hadebe, Mavis Posa, Cyril Ramaphosa, maybe Zweli Mkhize, and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. So it's going to be a complicated leadership race. Yes, the front runners to me are Cyril Ramaphosa and Dlamini Zuma. I think Dlamini Zuma is still ahead, but I think the margin between Dlamini Zuma and Ramaphosa is narrowing. And what I wait to see is how the increasing number of candidates is going to affect either candidate, whether it will advantage or disadvantage either candidate. But I also want to see how Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma will be affected by her proximity, perceived or real, to Jacob Zuma and the dominant faction in the ANC. Because if we have more scandals, because you have these emails and revelations every day, the question is whether they're going to cause enough damage to the Zuma camp to cause collateral damage to Dlamini Zuma in such a way that Ramaphosa or another candidate benefits from that. But if there's any candidate to watch, and again I must remind you of something else. I think it was at the Olympics where we all thought Pistorius was going to win, and this Brazilian came out of nowhere and beat him. And that Brazilian in this case may be Zweli Mkhize.
Finally, Aubrey, what does the fact that we have a lot of presidential candidates in the ANC say?
It's a very good thing, because in 2012, Kgalema Motlanthe, in my view, contested against Jacob Zuma knowing he was not going to win. And he ran as a candidate, as an independent candidate, and refused to be part of any faction and rejected courtship and support from all factions, because what he wanted to do is to affirm the principle of competitive leadership contests in the ANC. And again, he wanted to affirm the principle of rejecting factionalism in the ANC. So the fact that there are so many people who are raising their hands, making themselves available for the position of a president of the ANC, is a good thing. What is lacking, though, is that they have this newfound courage to condemn the factionalism, the corruption, state capture, everything venal and corrupt that has been going on under their noses, under their watch, with them listening and doing nothing about it, because in part they were benefiting from it. Now, one of them will be elected president of the ANC. Whoever wins must hope that the people will forget that they were part of the mess.
That was political analyst Aubrey Majeki speaking to Krima Media's Polity about the ANC policy conference.